order. Welcome to this morning's evidence session. This is the second session of our inquiry into the government's road safety strategy. And today we're going to be focusing on the role of infrastructure in improving road safety. We're aware that there may be references made to distressing topics, so please do not, please do not mention individual cases where there may be ongoing legal proceedings. So could I ask you all to introduce yourselves, starting with Dan?
Yes, good morning. Dan Campsall. I'm the chairman of Agilisys, and I also am the chair of the Board of Trustees for Parliamentary Advisory Council for Transport Safety.
Hello, I'm Kate Carpenter, Vice President of the Chartered Institution of Highways and Transportation. We're a membership body for road safety engineers and the design and transport community, and I have a day job in casualty reduction.
Morning, Chair Committee. My name's Viney. I work for Living Streets, the UK charity for everyday walking, and I'm the Campaigns and Public Affairs Co-ordinator.
Hi everyone, my name's Sarah Whitebread. I'm Head of Policy and Public Affairs at Cycling UK. We're the UK's national cycling charity working for healthier, happier and greener lives through cycling.
Good morning everybody. Martin Wiltshire, Assistant Manager, Safer Roads and Parking at Hampshire County Council.
Welcome everybody. So we've heard the government strategy's targets are described as ambitious. Can the same be said of the measures in it to make the road infrastructure safer? I'll go to Dan.
Yeah, so I think it is a very ambitious target if we compare this to other comparable countries, sort of Sweden, Norway's. They've taken 20 years to deliver this sort of level of reduction. When my team has done some modelling of the measures that are within the strategy, and some of them are quite hard to model because we don't yet know exactly how they'll be implemented, it's hard to see that the measures that are currently within the strategy will be sufficient, and it's likely that there will be further work required, consideration of some other policy measures for sure.
Yes, we fully agree that the targets are aspirational. The measures within the strategy are supported. The previous session discussed the issue of needing a plan, and for us that's the gap between an aspirational target and the split between enormous numbers of highway authorities each doing their own element is where the biggest potential gap for us sits from a highway infrastructure point of view.
I'm going to say the strategy is ambitious, but the targets, I would say it's a bit more of a yes and a no. Obviously 65% and 70% respectively for children reduced care size is ambitious if you consider the Netherlands between 1975 and 2025 achieved 80% less road fatalities and 95% across children. So that's 50 years. And we're looking to do 65 and 70 and 10. So that is ambitious. But however, for Living Streets, anything less than calling for Vision Zero on our roads before 2050 is given a sense of acceptable losses, which if you ask any parent that's lost their child through a road traffic collision, I'm sure you'd say that that's not good enough. To answer the Chair's question, at Living Streets, we think there's lots of strong measures, but however, the strategy does have a lack of real emphasis on the need to change the status quo and put the onus of road safety onto street design. We do believe that predominantly it feels individual behaviour centred, and for decades our streets have been built around motor vehicles. So, to change our street scene in a very radical way to focus around people, I think could give the government a chance of achieving that Vision Zero, which we know would be great for the nation's health, get more people walking, wheeling and cycling.
Well, we were really, really pleased to see the strategy. It's been a long time coming. We've lost over a decade without a strategy. We know that targets work. They worked really well in the last Labour government, so it's a shame we haven't had them for such a long time. We do think that they're ambitious. We also would have liked to see a Vision Zero target, but we recognise that the targets in the strategy are ambitious. I think the key thing for us in the delivery is that it's going to take, this isn't just about government, this is about all different parts of society, local authorities, police, different agencies, organisations like ourselves working together to deliver the strategy. And that's going to take a lot of coordination and a lot of work, and we feel that that work needs to happen very quickly. And so what we would say is it's concerning, I guess, that given the ambition of the strategy, we haven't seen quicker progress even in this first 6 months of the strategy on some of the things that could be done very quickly. So we're still waiting 6 months in, for example, for the board, which is going to govern and hold the strategy, make sure that we're delivering. We still don't yet know the makeup of that board. We don't know when it's first going to meet. So we need to see some rapid progress on some of these things if we are going to meet the strategy.
Martin.
Echo those comments that have previously been mentioned. The targets and the strategy are welcomed, but I think for the local authorities to play their part, investment is required.
Thank you. Back to Dan. In your written evidence, you said the current measures are probably insufficient to meet the stated ambition. So what does the government need to do, briefly, to fix that?
Yeah, so subsequent to our submitting the evidence, we did do some modelling of the likely savings associated with some of the measures. So, for example, introduction of a lower blood alcohol concentration limit, which we recognise as valuable, brings us into line with other countries. But that measure on its own is only likely to deliver about 0.36% reduction in KSIs, and that would require additional enforcement to make that really pay. There are other measures out there that we've got international evidence on that would likely deliver considerably more than that. So things like the introduction of graduated driver licensing, which I know was discussed at the previous evidence session, probably would bring 2 to 5% reduction in KSIs. If you were to explore using a default 20 mile an hour limit, as per the situation in Wales, that might deliver more like 10 to 15% reduction in KSIs. So some of the measures in there are great. General safety regulation, that's probably going to deliver something like 3 to 5% reduction over the term of the strategy. So there's some good stuff in there, but I think when we look at the evidence that we've got internationally and we model it out, there's still more that it needs to be done. And even with a decent package of measures, getting to 65 is going to be a challenge.
Okay, thank you. And Kate, your written evidence, you raised concern that of the suitability of the strategy using the 2022 to 2024 baseline because changes in the DFTs, data formats, the inclusion of publicly reported data and system changes within police forces have not yet been taken into account. So what risk does that create for measuring progress against the strategy's KSI targets?
So yes, there's an issue around are you comparing like with like? We've got inconsistency around the country and different authorities using different approaches. The bigger problem, which is almost existential from a understanding causation to prevent future incidents, is that availability of data now has become a crisis. That even within public sector bodies, the data are restricted in what they can access. So you can't get contributory factors, road safety factors. We can't get the written description of a collision or its location, and they're often plotted many miles from where they happened, even fatalities. We can't get speeding, drink drive, drug drive, seatbelt, all of the medical, the big 4 or 5 factors are concealed from the people analysing data. So that we do have concern about a disparity in baseline and inconsistency around the country, and the quality of the data is a real concern to people doing analysis. But the access is actually a bigger issue now.
That's useful. Right, I'm going to move on to, we're going on to safe system and infrastructure. Scott.
Thank you, Chair. So the government says the safe system approach is at the heart of its strategy. Is it?
I'll lead for sure, but I think one of the things, if you talk to those who implemented Vision Zero in Sweden, it took an act of Parliament and it took a commitment to say that actually we are going to address as a policy intervention the safety of our citizens on our road. That requires us to address the infrastructure as well as the enforcement landscape, as well as the behaviour of road users, etc. And the system really does, encompass all of those aspects of it. And at the moment, what we've got in the strategy is measures that seek to address quite a lot of the behavioural outcomes, And then there's also some measures around the sort of the learning associated with the system. But I think we haven't necessarily got that sort of holistic approach. We're still reliant on highway legislation that dates back 40, 50 years. If we were to really want to embed the safe system, we probably ought to be looking at it in a more holistic way, including the duty on those who design, operate and maintain the roads, as well as on those who use them.
Okay, anything else on that?
Yeah, I think the interconnectedness of the elements, people often think about them discretely as separate items that different, and they are primarily under the control of different elements, but they are fundamentally interconnected, which means modelling it is difficult. There's a lack of understanding in a lot of the highway community of what the safe system actually looks like in practice, and we've got 192,000 miles of road just in England. You can't change nearly all of that, even in a 10-year period. Yeah. So the scale of it, the system, applying system to that then requires to do things that you can do systematically more widely, so the gender safety regulation, graduated driver licensing and so on, national level speed limit changes, they could achieve that kind of national change over 192,000 miles of road, whereas engineering individual junctions, changing individual designs, won't even touch it.
So, I mean, so in Scotland, just like in England, we've supported safe system approach, and I think sometimes it means, because it is a system, the person responsible for one part of the system, it's too easy to say, well, we're doing our best, but it's really up to these other people to do much more. And I think that's what you're saying, that we have to connect these silos together somehow and break down the barriers.
Vision and leadership is, if you have a vision that says, this is the approach that we're taking, and every part of what we do must be aligned to that, in a local authority or a strategic authority, you say every single part must be aligned to that. Every choice of surfacing material, every choice of a drainage asset, are we going to light this road or not, management of clearing vegetation, management of road markings. Okay. Every single bit of it, it's the incremental gains point was raised in the previous hearing, and I think that's really helpful to think about. It will have to be 1,000 things, each of which brings a small element to hit that level.
And you think we've seen this in Sweden then? I think Van mentioned Sweden. I'm not claiming it's perfect, but they're well down the road to delivering at that.
The embodied division, haven't
yeah, okay. I think Sarah wants to come in.
I would really echo that. I think this is obviously partly about resource, I would say, because if you're going to take a truly safe system approach, you have to really think about every aspect of it. And so we have had a tendency in this country, for example, to, in some places, we've lowered speed limits, which is great, and we really want to see that. But the best way to do it is to have the lower speed limit in combination with measures to naturally get the road user to slow. So, altering the layout of the road to such a way that it encourages people to drive more slowly. And obviously that costs more money. So, it's good to put in speed limits regardless, because any reduction in speed is welcome and they do have an impact without those measures, but it makes a much bigger difference if you can include those measures as well. And I think the trouble that we're seeing is that we don't have the investment there to do that, and we don't have the holistic view across different government departments as well, that it's their responsibility. It's not just the responsibility of the DFT, it's also MHCLG, it's justice, it's a Home Office, so we need to bring all of these departments together to really embed the safe system, I think.
Zach?
Yeah, so just kind of following on from Sarah's point, I'm just going to ask, what are we trying to do here? And I would say, if you're looking at safe roads and safe roadsides, we're trying to design self-explaining roads for self-enforcing safe behaviour. So to use an example, which is something that we were really happy to see recently in the third cycling and walking investment strategy, the UK government to commit to 10,000 new safer crossings by 2035. And recently, within the Better Connected strategy, they will grant powers for local enforcement to roll out side road zebras. I want to put the emphasis that we really support this and we really support better crossings, but a side road zebra is not our end goal here. Like, if you've got a side road zebra, you are reinforcing and strengthening pedestrian priority around the highway code, but you are relying on the conformance of vehicular behaviour on those side road turns to slow down. Like if you did something, we've got our technical team at Living Street came up with a campaign with us called Bin Your Flares, which is referring to flared junctions, where junctions with a low radius of curvature, sorry, technical term, engineering background coming in here, means that motorists and cyclists could turn at very high speeds, and this prevents conformance to the highway code. Essentially, if you lowered that radius of curvature, it would naturally slow motorist behaviour. And then also, we see side road zebras as a stepping stone to greater rollout of continuous footway, which is such a great thing in terms of accessibility for wheeled road users as well.
Okay, good. So my next question was going to be about infrastructure changes, and I know safe systems are a bit much more than infrastructure. So Sarah and Zach, you've talked a little bit about that, about designing for speed rather than just putting a sign up. Is there any other changes you think we'd see in our communities if we're thinking about the safe system approach and infrastructure? Sarah, you've got something else to add?
Well, I mean, it's, I guess, a clear point that I would make, but the most important thing that we can do to protect road users is to separate. So where we can, we really need to see people who are cycling separated from people who are walking, separated from car drivers, and so that's why the cycling walking investment strategy is so important, and why we're concerned that the investment isn't going to be enough to be able to do that to the extent that we would like to see.
Okay.
So at the heart of the safe system is an understanding that the human being has a certain tolerance to kinetic energy. As soon as you exceed that point, the human body breaks down quite rapidly. At the moment, we have large parts of our network where the conflict types and crash energy is just simply too high to be tolerable. So we've talked about it somewhat in the urban environment. That's particularly true on large parts of our rural network as well, where we've got junctions where the kinds of conflicts that are capable of occurring at 60 miles an hour, completely permissible by law, but actually the outcomes of them would be and are consistently horrendous. So we do need to look at that combination of the speed at which things are moving on that network, the energy that they carry, and really what is survivable in terms of conflict type. And that would either require us to engineer up the quality of some of our particularly rural single carriageways, or to reduce the speeds down in order to manage down the level of energy.
I think you're reading my questions from just across the table there. So the next one is going to be about national highways, and really what role they play, or what role have they played over the last 10 years since we adopted the safe systems approach at UK government level. I mean, is it about, for these single car carriageway roads, just changing the design, or changing the speed limit, or a bit of both? I think, just like Sarah was talking about urban areas, there's a similar tension on these single carriageway roads, isn't there? The cheap thing to do is change the sign, but that might not have the impact we want. I don't want to put words in your mouth, sorry.
Yeah, no, it's true. So again, we did some work, you referenced Scotland previously. We did some work looking at the scale of change that might be required across their network if they were to reduce the speed limit on their national single carriageways, because largely the driving population is tending to stick to somewhere around the kind of 52, 53 miles an hour in a 60 anyway. So they're not travelling at 60. They're already accepting that these roads can't be travelled at that speed. They need to feel comfortable at a lower speed. But arguably, once you get to about 40 miles an hour, if you sustain a T-bone style crash, even in a modern car, then the injury outcomes will be severe, and they could quite possibly be fatal. So in those cases, we either need to reduce, if we're allowing for those sorts of conflicts, where a vehicle emerging from an at-grade junction could therefore be involved in a T-bone type crash, those speeds are too high. So we'd either need to reduce them down, or we need to design junctions that remove the risk of that sort of conflict. Anything else on infrastructure, Sarah?
Well, it was only picking up if we're talking about the rural roads, because we see this as something that's really, really important. That rural roads are the most dangerous roads for people who are cycling, and it's something that can be done really quickly. So we would really like to see the government. It says in the Road Safe Strategy that they're going to look at the Agilisys road categorisation research. We would really like them to do that quickly, and it would be great if this committee would make that recommendation, that essentially The government need to issue guidance to local authorities. They need to decide, what are the appropriate speed limits for different categories of road, issue that guidance, give the local authorities the resource they need to implement those speed limits, because they do have huge public support. We've done some YouGov polling on this, with overwhelming 79%, 78% supporting lowering speed limits on single carriageway rural roads when they're passing through villages or where they're narrow and windy. So it's a very popular measure. It could be done very quickly, and if we're going to meet the ambitious targets of the strategy, we need to take those quick wins quickly.
Yeah, when we looked at rural roads in Edinburgh, and there is quite a lot outside the city in the speed limits, on Street View, Google Street View, you could actually see there's quite a lot of people walking between different settlements. There's no footpaths, there's rubbish public transport, and it was quite incredible actually how many people are there. So it can be a real issue. So, Kate, sorry.
Yeah, there are things that you can do on fairly large scale relatively quickly, like in urban areas, reallocation of road space using light segregation, for example. It's done very widely in COVID. Some authorities, like in Leicester, they were delivering virtually a mile a week of protected infrastructure, and they've made it permanent. You can do something temporarily, show that it works, show that there is enough space if you reallocate some space and then change it. In rural areas, you can't really do that. One of the biggest things about infrastructure is the use of the infrastructure and the metrics against which we measure it. You asked about national highways. Yeah. They have mean speed as a primary indicator, but mean speed is a poor indication of the variance of speed at a point in time between vehicles right now, over the time of the day, and over the length of a route. And those things are the predictor of safety. And as Dan said, a bit like the concern around 30s being reduced to 20s, people envisage going from a constant 30 to a constant 20, which of course isn't what you do. You have increasing speed, and fuel use is dominated by accelerating and braking. And ironically, a lot of benefits we saw in Wales from the infrastructure changes being speed limits was around public health and that wider perspective. And one of the things that's really important to us is the communication that goes alongside the infrastructure, because the messaging hasn't been helpful. There's a perception that things aren't supported. The majority of people in Wales who've got 20 limits like them and want them kept. More walking, cycling, all those sort of wider benefits, knock-on effects on active travel and public health. But the messaging is part of that, and national highways, although most of their network is more high speed, they do have urban parts of the network, but they've also got the deepest pockets, and they have the ability to do things that local authorities just can't do.
Yeah, in Edinburgh, we get grumble still about the 20 scheme, but nobody wants it removed from their street. And So Dan, you'd previously said the safe system approach relies on the 4 C's, and none of them are the words that you might be thinking: commitment, capability, capacity, and culture. What's the most challenging? Where's the biggest gap in the 4 of them just now? Sorry to quote your words back.
No,
it's never great.
No, absolutely. One of the questions that I've now taken to refusing to answer is, if I want to do one thing in the safe system, which one thing should I do? Because it's a system, and in a sense there's the same argument here, that these things are mutually beneficial and they cohere in order to strengthen the response as a whole. So we developed that framework in partnership with Transport Scotland as they were looking to implement a safe system. And I think what they've demonstrated is that the commitment has been there very strongly from governments. You've had a Cabinet Secretary for Transport in Ms Hislop, who stood down at the last election, gave significant leadership, and from within Transport Scotland, so senior training sessions for people like the Transport Scotland Board and for members of the Scottish Parliament. Then they've been working on building the capability as well. So actually we've delivered training to around 500 professionals, local authorities, police, fire and rescue services, public health colleagues, etc. So they've really recognised that if we want to get the safe system understood, they need to build out that capability. To also improve the capacity as well, so bringing more partner agencies in to be included within that. But the culture piece, I think, is quite interesting, and really what we focused on is not trying to address the culture of the public, because that's obviously quite a big challenge, but the culture within organisations, so that the safe system and the principles that underpin it are are shared between organisations within their strategic partnership board, within their operational partnership group, within their local authorities. And I think now there is there's shared language, there's shared ambition that works across the piece there. So I think they do all need addressing collectively.
Okay, I'll come to you in a second, Zach. Is there anything...
don't worry. Won't forget.
Sorry, I keep on over you.
That's okay.
Apologies. Is there anything else we can take on board from Scotland? That's again a general question, I guess. You mean you've outlined the approach there, either good or bad. Is there anything else we can learn from Scotland?
Look, I think there's a lot that we can take from the Scottish example. One of the aspects of the commitment is the fact that they have continued to pump the funding in to support then the ambition. So they've developed something called the Framework Fund. So there's a specific pot of money that people can bid into to innovate around their safe system ambition at a local level, or as policing, etc. And they've put more money into the trunk road network, etc. So I think that combination of the political commitment that's backed by the resource to go and try and get this thing operationalised.
Yeah, I mean. As I used to be a councillor in Edinburgh, and I agree, I think Fiona Hislop was an excellent Cabinet Secretary for Transport. But the funding that was available to councils wasn't always enough, to be honest. And that's always a challenge. It's not a criticism of Fiona at all. Zach, I've been guilty of overlooking you, so much so that I've been chastised by this year.
Any more on safe systems and infrastructure? We're going to come on to rural roads later, because we've got a couple of questions there. But Zach, you
yeah, so I guess I was picking up on Dan's really thoughtfully put 4 C's, and I had a really strong reaction to when Scott said that, and I think that's culture, and like inherently, usually on the roads, a motor vehicle is involved in a killed or seriously injured collision, and I think I would comment that the general commercialisation of motor culture and how speed and motoring is sold creates that behaviour where people are less likely to be safe road users. Cars adverts rarely show any people outside the car. There's the family car narrative, which normalises driving children instead of encouraging them to travel actively, and it kind of makes car culture seem cuddly or soft. To maybe go for specific examples on this, I'm going to speak to an excellent campaign being run by Allies Clean Cities. You may have heard of the car spreading campaign, which takes notes of cities like Paris that are bringing in higher parking charges for SUVs. Now, this might seem a niche issue, but if SUVs were a nation, they'd be 5th in the table of global CO2 emissions. And they're a growing prevalence on our roads. SUV and trucks have had a 10 times increase in sales in 2 decades and make up of 66% of the vehicle registrations in the UK. So, the selling of motoring as glamorous rather than you walking, wheeling, or getting a bike. This could really change the way people see our streets. What could the government do tangibly? They could bring this into public awareness. So a think campaign on the danger, especially to children, of bigger cars, and maybe, as mentioned, like Cardiff, as I was really happy to see in the road safety strategy, looking at bigger parking charges. And I believe Clean Cities came out that actually most people don't see this as a particular issue. And it is an issue because cars are getting 2 centimetres bigger and wider every year. So I was really happy to see that as a commitment in the road safety strategy for car spreading to be looked at by the government.
Culture is really important. On Monday we rightly had a statement about the rail clash where somebody really unfortunately died, and that's an awful situation. But just imagine if we had a statement every time someone died in the roads. This would be a busy place,
Yeah, no, I really agree with that. Why is it that we put up with this? 1,600 people every year killed on our roads. And to the point that Zach was just making, which I completely agree with, the fact is, if a child is hit by an SUV, they are 83% more likely to be killed, right? So that's a serious thing, and we need to address it. And I think that saying in the strategy that they're going to look at the evidence around this is excellent, but the evidence is there, so we can move on this, and we should.
We're all starting to get a bit ranty now, Chair, so we're all starting to get a bit ranty now, so I'll pass back to you.
Yeah, we're here to ask the questions.
One quick more thing about what Scotland did. The single police authority has been really beneficial in clarity of vision, which to have a lot of differences between police authorities. I'm not suggesting a single English Police Authority would be a simple thing to do, but it shows how organisational structure can affect outcomes.
Yeah, but the challenge with that is, if I could say, is local accountability of that nationally set policy. That can be a huge challenge.
Which we're going to come on
to.
Point. Okay. Elsie, funding and resources.
Thanks, Chair. So far in this inquiry, we've heard evidence that our roads have been in a state of managed decline for a decade now, and obviously that has huge implications for our constituents' safety. It's certainly something that's repeatedly raised with me in my constituency. Given this situation, do you think that the funding earmarked in the road safety strategy is enough to see the reductions in deaths and serious injuries that the strategy commits to? Kate, can we start with you on that one?
I think there's two issues. The funding is welcome. It's unclear how it will be spent, where it will be spent, the leadership. The scariest thing I hear in transport is it can't do any harm. You know, people spend a lot of money on initiatives that not only don't make things better, they actually make them worse. And the clarity of where you're spending it. We have a lot of evidence about what works and what doesn't, but people are doing a lot of what doesn't work. I mentioned the sort of political disparity between different authorities, and unfortunately we're now in a situation, we just had our annual 2-day conference for road safety auditors, and lots of people from local authorities came up to me and said, our elected members want to scrap all 20-mile-an-hour limits because they're not interested in any safety benefits, and they're not interested in air quality, which I found interesting. But people not realising what the benefits are, the irony, what they should be interested in, gets them re-elected. The actual interest of the public is tricky, but the funding, where you spend it, you must be spending it on things that work. And you would think people will only spend it on things that work. They really don't. There's a lot of money spent on things that don't make them better.
Do others have comments on whether the funding earmarked for road infrastructure is enough? Dan, can I come to you first?
Yeah, sure. Well, I think the funding that's identified within the strategy principally addresses the settlement under the Road Investment Strategy for National Highways, part of the integrated settlement to mayoral combined authorities, and the pothole funding. So actually there's relatively little in there that is addressing the safety changes that we might need in terms of infrastructure elsewhere. So there's a large amount that's gone into the road investment strategy, 27 billion over the term of the strategy. But actually, the road investment strategy reduces the responsibility of national highways in terms of improving casualties. So they've only got a target of 7.5% over that 5-year strategy, which is discordant from the national ambition that we started with today. And when they've got as Kate says, the sort of the deepest pockets, they should probably be addressing, sort of the larger part of that. And if you actually carry forward, they currently account for 6.6% of KSIs on the network. By the end of 2035, if they continue at that rate and we achieve the national ambition, they would account for 16.4% of KSIs. They'd actually be accounting for more KSIs unless they speed up progress. Then the money for local authorities is principally the maintenance money. It's about filling potholes. It's not about addressing safety measures. And I guess Martin would speak well to that as a local authority representative.
Yeah, Sarah, I'm going to bring you in a moment actually on this, but yeah, Martin, do you want to go next?
Yeah, the investment falls short of what we need to do to maintain our roads in a safe condition. We prioritise safety defects. The budget doesn't stretch to refreshing sort of signs and lines, so we have to prioritise them to stop and give way lines our top priority.
And just Sarah, because I know that you did raise concerns in your written evidence about the amount of funding allocated to local authorities to deliver the strategy. Would you agree, though, that it's not just a matter of funding, but it's also a matter of expertise within local authorities as well?
Yeah, I think we would definitely agree with that, but obviously getting those staff with that expertise and training them and so on also takes resource.
Yeah.
But yes, we absolutely recognise it's about the expertise, it's about having the people to do that work, it's about the political direction, but it is also about the resource, and just to emphasise that point, that the funding allocated within the road safety strategy is the Road Investment Fund, right? So that is a fund which isn't primarily about safety. It's about investing in the road network for all sorts of different reasons. There is no funding allocated in the road safety strategy specifically for road safety. And so the funding that will be relied on to make the biggest improvements for cyclists will be the money identified in the cycling walking investment strategy, which is welcome, but again, a lot of that 4.5 billion, which was announced a couple of weeks ago, which we really welcome, that funding is made up of lots of different pots of money which are going to local authorities that won't necessarily be spent on cycling and walking. So it's not a clear picture exactly how much resource is going to go into delivering this strategy, and that's why it makes it really hard to determine at this point, is the resource enough? Because the government haven't been clear on exactly how they're going to fund this.
Okay, that's clear. And Zach?
Yeah, I'm just going to come in, and we're asking the question, is funding enough? Like, each road death costs society £2.5 million. And like, since that we're starting to transgress into the realm of English devolution and local powers, I spoke to the West Midlands Road Safety Commissioner today about this, and he interestingly, he said that he didn't feel like he had any direct powers over anything. There is a lot of local authorities can do what they want, but he felt that there were probably tools, and I think there are tools available to the central governments that they don't use, aka taking, like, an example from Wales's lead and doing a national default 20 mile an hour speed limit. And he also said, like, I guess when you're speaking to capability, he said highways engineering has an archaic tradition of looking to move vehicles as quickly and efficiently as possible, usually cars, but this culture, I believe, is changing and quite slowly. But I really would like to second Sarah's remarks to do with no designated pot for road safety. And whilst there is, and I really appreciate this, the government, a lot more joined up approach between the better connected road safety and cycling walking investment strategies, it feels like there's some areas with the road safety strategy, such as maybe I would say its links to like the work that's being done in the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government, that it doesn't quite realise actually that you can plan quite a lot of these things out. So I hope this is not something the government is going to miss in a joined up approach.
Thank you.
Thank you. Right, now we're going on to the local implementation. Alex.
Thank you, Chair. So the strategy sets out, it says that national targets are an effective way to achieve goals, but does it give enough guidance to the local authorities on what the effective implementation of safer road infrastructure actually looks like in practice? Should we just go that way for a change? Start with Martin?
I would say there's no real mention in the strategy for safety engineering. The traditional 3 E's to casualty reduction has been enforcement, largely carried out by the police, education, which is sort of like a joint responsibility between county councils and other organisations, again, like the police and fire and rescue services, and then the engineering. The engineering encompasses the whole casualty reduction. It's a continuous cycle, really, of analysing collision data, preparing a programme from that information to address casualty reduction locations, implementing those measures, and then monitoring the effectiveness of those measures. And it's a continuous circle that goes back round. We normally use 5 years' worth of collision data to support our priority programmes. So that's really the process that local authorities probably use.
Sarah?
I think that I would go back to the point I raised earlier about, well, firstly, that local authorities need more resource, but also there are some quick wins that could be implemented where local authorities could be given guidance more quickly. So, for example, around rural roads, speed limit setting on rural roads. And we think there could be more support for local authorities in reducing speed limits and then also in the resource to put in the infrastructure to make those speed limits more likely to be complied to.
Are you suggesting that basically that would be a national approach? So
yeah.
That across the whole country this must happen?
Yeah, well, I mean, we do see a definite role for local authorities in understanding their road network, and so the government could do it a couple of different ways. They could accept the categories, say these are the speed limits we think should be on each of these categories, and then it's up to the local authority to determine what road fits into what category. So, you know, there definitely is a role for local authorities, but the government should be setting a clear expectation as to what the speed should be. The other area where local authorities have a key role is in education, and one of our concerns is around the awareness of the 2022 changes to the Highway Code, where we really feel, and we've done polling on this, which actually is referenced in the road safety strategy. We did polling a year after those changes were introduced, and we're coming up to 5 years next year. A year after they were introduced, 75% of people said they were aware, but of those, only around 28% of people could actually correctly say what the correct passing distance is if you're driving past a cyclist at 30 miles an hour, say, for example. So those changes are not yet fully understood, and we really do need to see a national education campaign on that, government working with local authorities on that to embed those changes as part of national understanding.
Zach? To add?
Yeah, I guess like something when we speak about local enforcement is we have like some really good strategic goals to this strategy from the UK government, but for me I don't see where the accountability for the local authorities to look to want to achieve them lies. You know, one of the first things I can think about this is Active Travel England have a ATE capability score, which they very much rate a local authority's ambition to deliver and capability to deliver walk, wheeling and cycling projects focused upon political leadership, and whatever score they're given corresponds to a certain amount of funding. Now, there is a bit of a danger to this, really. I guess you're giving, like with a devolved approach, local authorities, very much it's based upon, I guess, like the willingness and the progressiveness of the local authority. But in this, I think, lies a really good opportunity within the Department for Transport properly to provide really good leading guidance on this. And I guess we're living streets, so we're going to speak about pavement parking. Now, as an element, I would say we don't have loads of data to see how much pavement parking is a contributing factor to road traffic collisions, but following the English Devolution and Community Empowerment Bill, we now will see actually a real transport policy in real time being implemented on a local level. So my point is, it's really important that the DFT produces really strong, robust guidance so the local authorities, and it would be interesting to see what Martin has to say on this, local authorities feel like they have the knowledge and capability as well as hopefully the funding. And I think there's a big opportunity going beyond pavement parking for the Manual for Streets and then also the Road Safety Investigation branch to provide similar hubs of expertise to educate local authorities.
Thank you.
Yeah, the leadership and context I think is really powerful. We've had a progressive localism of giving local authorities the power to take decisions. The context they're in, they are cash-strapped and resource-strapped. We have, road safety teams that are tiny. One authority around 10 years ago got rid of the whole of its road safety team and essentially has none at all. So we're in a position where the industry is strapped. Increasing political pressures, more and more of our highway authority are telling us that they know what good looks like, but they politically can't do it. And in that context...
Sorry, politically or in budget terms?
Politically. So a political pressure to say, we don't want this thing that you say is safer because we think something else is more appropriate. So it's it's almost an arguing the laws of physics. So we've got authorities, some are passionate about doing the right thing, but are struggling politically. Some may believe that they're doing the right thing already and they're not aware of what's necessary, about being resource-strapped. If we're giving guidance on setting speed limits, they may choose to ignore it. Even if they choose to comply with it, it's incredibly inefficient for individual authorities to be processing thousands and thousands of traffic regulation orders, thousands of signing of individual routes. It's efficient to do it at a national level, but it's also the leadership at that national level. One of the things we learned in the early 2000s with the speed camera rollout that was done at that time, it was often referred to as hypothecation, but it was cost recovery. The people would often say speed isn't the cause of collisions. And they're right in a sense. So, for example, take T-junctions where, as Dan said, a lot of our unsurvivable collisions occur. The primary cause is a driver pulling out of that junction, making a misjudgment of the speed and position of vehicles on the main road. The drivers who most make those errors are the youngest drivers and the oldest drivers. Graduated driver licensing supporting older drivers is important for that. You can't engineer and educate 40 million drivers. But what we showed was that tackling a secondary factor, speed on the main road, which made it harder to judge turning in and out of the side road, eliminated fatal and serious injuries, and in many cases eliminated injuries completely. So in the authority that I delivered road safety for then, in Bedfordshire, we met our 2010 casualty reduction targets 5 years early, just from enforcement of 5% of the network. And people would say speed wasn't the issue. If it wasn't the issue, if we only changed speed, we wouldn't change casualties. And that's why the Wales lesson and lots of London and lots of Scotland is helpful in showing if we only change speed and we get a change in outcome, we know it works. But we need to recognise the political context that local highway authorities are in. They are in a cleft stick now.
Yeah, so you've told us about authorities that can't or won't spend on improvements for road safety, and also you said in answer earlier that there is money being spent on things that don't work. Is this an increasing problem because of the way that local government and devolution is working, or has it ever been thus?
I think there's three bits of it. It is increasing because we've got ever more resource reduction in local authorities. And unfortunately, reorganisation is going to make that worse. If you've got a county council with 2 road safety engineers and that county is split into 4 authorities, they're each going to get half of a road safety engineer. So there's an interesting challenge coming with the move to more smaller local authorities. We are seeing more of we've had enough of experts, we know what good looks like, so the political context is changing that. So we do have that problem. We have an amazing community of road safety engineering experts, road safety auditors who look at highway proposals before they're implemented. If they were involved at the inception, not just when you're starting to do a scheme and say, is this what we're doing, defining what the problem is. People who've got experience in analysing collision data and understanding what works, not just in safety, but what works, what creates efficient movement of traffic, people being able to make their journeys, the difference in different speed metrics. If you've only got one metric, you may not spot a difference in a problem. You might have 2 speed limits, both 30 miles an hour, and both have an 85th percentile speed of 30. In one, everyone's driving at 30, everyone's driving 33, say, and you've got 85th percentile of 30. You might have another where 90% of the traffic is travelling at 20 miles an hour, and the remainder are travelling at 60 miles an hour. They have different problems, but the 85th percentile may be the same. If you only have one metric, and National Highways has one metric, which is mean speed, you tackle the wrong problem. And local authorities often don't have the power to do this. Oxfordshire's done something interesting. They've stopped measuring speed to do school streets and speed limit changes. They spend the money on engagement and doing more sites. Because I've never been surprised by a speed limit survey in my 38 years of looking at them. So let's stop measuring things when we know what the answer's going to be. I can almost draw the graphs for you. So let's spend the money on the stuff that works, and that's engaging with the public about what the benefits are, and that's public health, active travel, air quality, noise, vibration, journey time reliability, rather than...
And fewer child deaths.
Yes. Yeah.
So I think to build on the case that Kate has been making, actually I came into road safety because of the programme to expand safety camera partnerships back in the early 2000s. And we had both guidance and national structures to support the delivery of that guidance. So it wasn't just, here's the guidance, now it's over to you. It was, here's the guidance, now we'll work with you to establish a business case, to evaluate your data, to ensure that there's academic rigour in the programme. And I think there's quite a lot that we could do that doesn't necessarily require us to have big mandated, heavy central government programmes, but basically goes beyond just, here's a circular, now you consider what to do with your limits. by increasing the amount of sort of what I would refer to as the tooling available. So to take the speed limit example and build on that, we can quite easily now build out a data set that will tell you across an entire network, because we've done it for large parts of the country, things like carriageway width, residential development, trip attractors, light commercial development, school locations, potential pedestrian densities, traffic flow, traffic speed, all of those sorts of things. And therefore we can say these parts of the network will probably be amenable to these sorts of speed limits. Then you hand that back to your professionals in the local authority and say, make some judgments. We've given you a whole load of data that says it probably looks like it should fit in this sort of categorisation, this sort of functional hierarchy. Now it's up to you as the local professionals to judge that for yourself. And I think there's a lot of ways that we could utilise good quality national guidance with some additional tooling, particularly utilisation of the data that is now available to us, to enable local authorities to succeed.
Right. I've got a question on local government structure, because Kate, you made a really important point about the potential loss of capacity in the smaller authorities, although there are ways around that with joint services and so on, but you make a fair point. I'm a London MP, and we've got unitary authorities with the TfL roads, but similar policy outcomes sought by both tiers, just organisational issues about trying to address safety problems across the TfL roads. But I'm aware, and I say, have I got this right, being a London MP, that in two-tier authorities, you've got a challenge where you've got the district, maybe a town or a small, a large town or a series of towns, which might, a town district, which has a strong, let's say, road safety, proactive travel set of policies, but the highway authority has a different set of priorities, and often, if it's party political differences, it may be geographic priorities as well. Is that a challenge? Is that a serious challenge, is it in certain places a serious challenge? And does the reorganisation and the ending of the two-tier structure move away from that? And Martin, I know you're in a two-tier setup.
Yeah, our district and borough councils have limited sort of road safety functions anyway, so the county council is responsible and has everything for the statutory duties that exist.
Okay, the example I'm thinking of is Ipswich, where there's a strong case for pedestrianisation and pedestrian-friendly work from the city.
There are elements of that where the funding from SIL and other elements and desires from the boroughs and districts want pedestrianisation, but we work together to achieve that.
Sorry, you're
just to say on that, actually, when you end up with a mayor on top, the mayor then becomes the transport authority and the local councils are still the highways authority. So that would be a new problem.
So there's still potential challenge.
Yes.
From the cycling and the walking perspective, Sarah and Zach, you're trying to get in. Sarah?
Yeah, no, I was just going to echo, Chair, that this is definitely an issue, and the complicated nature of local government. So I'm from Cambridgeshire. We have an incredibly complex system where we have the city council, then we have the county council, then we have the combined authority, we also have the Greater Cambridge Partnership. So we have all of these different layers, all who do sort of a little bit of a related thing. So, we have housing and planning separate from highways, and this is very confusing for the public, and it also can often mean that you can't act quickly because there's always another, and the politics of these different bodies is often different. So trying to get a joined up approach to getting delivery is very, very challenging. I was also going to bring in the issue of national highways, just to say that you can sometimes get situations where, so for example in Kent along the A21, national highways put in a lovely cycle lane along that road, but it's the responsibility of the local councils in the two towns that are at either end of it to put in the final bit to take you in the centre of the town, and they haven't done that. So you then have a network which, you know, is not connected. No one wants to, you know, is going to use a cycle lane that doesn't take you the full stretch that you want to go. So, you know, we just need a more joined up approach to all of this.
Very clear example. Thank you, Zach.
Yeah, because I was going to use Cambridge as my example as well, so that's quite frustrating. I echo the points, like within a big county authority you can have vastly different, a huge level of disparity of political will. It will be, you know, I'll talk about pavement parking again, and it's going to be really interesting with the new powers for local leaders, actually whether if there's like local prohibitions that are delivered by a combined authority mayor, how well enforced are they going to be in the constituting like local authorities. I've heard, you know, rumours that it might be like a local authority vote, or will the mayor have like that ultimate power. So I don't have much more to add on this because I think I share a lot of Sarah's views.
Okay, so thank you. Doing away with one set of complications, but adding new ones are coming in, so that's quite important. Right, thank you. Now we're going to... Oh, sorry, Kate.
Yes, can I have one point? I definitely agree that two-tier can create different policies. Rural road safety tends to come off worse in that situation. It's a county level that tends to see the rural context, and the smaller authorities tend to focus on the urban areas. Yeah. And the problems are different in different places. The vulnerable road user are vulnerable in both. One of the other things we haven't talked about yet is development management. And new proposals, including highway designs done by consultants on tiny fees, and often a little bit separated from what is best practice knowledge about what works, ironically incentivised to make things compliant with standards, because that gets through planning easy. Mm-hmm. Compliance is often worse than non-compliance. So if you're building a new junction on an existing road, if the existing road is all 3 steps below desirable minimum standards, so should the new junction. If you build a junction you can see from space on a very low quality road, it actually will have a worse safety performance because of the self-explaining road. People feel very confident when there's lots of space. So development management is a problem, and of course local authorities, the district councils are planning authorities and the county councils are highway authorities, and the conflict between those in development is huge, especially sustainable developments with no public transport within a 15-minute walk, no active travel, no joined-upness of active travel. That's a big thing with authorities as well.
And I think in other ways, a manual for streets, the level of how out of date some of these standards are. Okay, we're going to now move on to road conditions and maintenance. Elsie.
How significant a factor is road maintenance in reducing deaths and serious injuries, and do you think that the strategy gives that role enough weight? Kate?
So, yes, it's important. There's a sort of joke in road safety engineering terms, potholes and parked cars are the best traffic calming. But there's a serious point, which is a driver attending to potholes isn't attending to cyclists and pedestrians. We know that 50% of fatal and serious injuries are people outside cars, pedestrians, cyclists and motorcyclists, and equestrians. They're numerically relatively small but particularly vulnerable. So there's a serious point that there are risk of loss of control, those users losing control on carriageway defects. The materials we use for road surfacing now, thin surface course, hot rolled asphalt we used to use, when it failed, you got an isolated pothole you could fill. When thin surfacing fails, 15 square metres fall off in 2 weeks. And that's very difficult to tackle, and you end up with this piecemeal patching. So it is a real problem, and I can't explain the reason that it's escalated. We know it's about funding, it's about management, all sorts of things. But it absolutely is a problem, and it's diverting budgets away from doing other network improvement, because we're just frantically trying to patch the roof.
I'm going to bring Martin in a moment and listen to his specific experience, but first, are there any major measures that you think could be taken by the department to achieve maximum impact?
From a maintenance perspective, yes. I don't think there's anything specific apart from what we flagged before. I guess the same issues around resourcing, around knowledge, around a lot of the industry. I think 50% of the transport industry are eligible for retirement in the next 10 years. This sort of loss of expertise. We've seen a lot of people through COVID have left the profession. The knowledge of what good looks like, a lot of the really sound experts have gone. And so in the same way the road safety community has been decimated by successive cuts, so has the maintenance community. So that's probably an issue.
Martin, which parts of the road network tend to cause the greatest problems to safe infrastructure in your experience? So obviously there's huge areas like drainage, surfacing, skid resistance, road edges, markings. Is there anything that you would emphasise more than others?
Certainly the skid resistance of the road surface is very important. We actively, there's a programme annually of testing the skid resistance of the surface, and we plot our accident data, collision data on top of that, and see, especially if there's any wet condition type collisions occurring, and we can have an input into any surfacing options there. Also surfacing, all our planned maintenance work comes via the casualty reduction team, so we can have an input to what actually goes back, because you have a nice blank canvas. You may look at revised road markings. But again, the visibility, sight lines, maintaining those and keeping the signs and lines clear and well maintained are factors in sort of casualty reduction across the network.
And just to broaden it back out again, I'd ask you the same question as I asked Kate. Do you think that the strategy gives this area enough weight?
Probably not. I think it's, again, going back to the investment needed to keep on top of it, and it's also resources and funding are linked to that.
Thank you. And just quickly, Dan, your written evidence says that maintenance is an undervalued element within the safe system. Why do you think that is? And is the department waking up to this, in your view?
Yeah, so I think it's because that sort of holistic view of how these things all work together. So, for example, if you don't cut back your vegetation, you have a glorious spring, all the hedges grow out, and the signs are no longer visible to drivers. They're also no longer visible to the intelligent speed assistance that is embedded in most modern cars. So there's then no feedback to the driver to say, actually, this road is a 40, not a national speed restriction. So it's the fact that many of those things interact. If we talked primarily about maintenance of the road surface, but if we don't maintain the barriers and a vehicle leaves the carriageway, then that barrier is not going to perform to standards, and then the outcomes of that collision will be much more severe. So it's the fact that the whole network is designed to function as a safety system, and if you don't maintain all of those aspects of it, then the interoperability of those systems also is depleted and the outcomes become worse.
Thank you. Zach?
Yeah, so a lot of the discourse here focuses on the carriageway, but I'm going to remind the committee that it's safer roads and roadsides. And we were really pleased to receive funding from the DFT a number of years ago to investigate the true cost and impact of pedestrians' trips and falls, which can be very much like exacerbated by broken, cracked and disintegrating pavements. This is very much like an issue that happens to people getting older. 30% of people older than 65 and 50% of people older than 80 fall at least once a year. And the declining condition of our pavements observed in street reviews we undertook represents an increased risk to pedestrian trips and falls. This might seem to the committee quite small fry, but this is estimated to cost the NHS more than 2.3 billion per year. But then also I'm thinking of the other effects to do with social alienation, that particularly elderly people, those who use wheelchairs, those who are visually impaired may witness if they feel trapped in their homes. And my ending point on this is the UK government has provided £7.3 billion over the next 4 years for highway maintenance, and we'd advocate that pavement maintenance is given equal priority to carriageways because everyone walks on wheels.
Yes, Martin.
I was going to add to my previous comments that rural crossroads are a particular issue. There's several counties working with the Ordnance Survey to look at locations where there's been collisions in the past, and actively seek some funding with a project to try and address satellite navigation system, to say, rather than saying proceed ahead, to actually say stop or give way at these junctions.
And just finally, Sarah, from cycling safety perspective, did you have anything to add on the issue of road maintenance?
Well, it's incredibly important.
Yeah.
So we know that, it's normally around 2 or 3 cyclists that are tragically killed every year through hitting a pothole. It's more like 60 a year who are either killed or seriously injured. So all of those incidents, could have been avoided by proper investment in maintenance of the road and of cycle paths. So we really want to see that investment, and that cycling infrastructure should be maintained, obviously, given the same priority as roads and as footpaths, and that there's parity, so that we're protecting everyone using the road. The other thing I would say is that some of this new technology in cars, the markings on the road is what is used, so that's really important sometimes for protecting people who are cycling, for the car to detect where the centre of the road is or where they should be in the car if they can't see the road marking. So it's not just about potholes, it's also about making sure that the road markings are kept in good condition, so that new technology, and also all of us, can see and can use the road safely.
So on the data collection on KSIs for cyclists and potholes, does it include where the incident was triggered possibly by the cyclist seeing it and braking suddenly and toppling over the handlebars, or swerving into the path of a car, as in, so avoidance as much as actually going into the pothole? Is there are those examples? And then another example I know of where someone was in a peloton, and it's possible that the person in front in the peloton swerved, and that was where the collision was. Is that data collected as well as actually going into a pothole?
Yeah, that's a really, really good question. I don't know is the answer. So I would have to take that away and have a look. I'm not aware that data of that level of detail is collected, but we could certainly look at that and write to the committee if we can find anything.
Martin?
Certainly, with if the police attend such an incident and there's an injury collision, that would hopefully be reported as some of the circumstances and contributory factors on the Stats 19 forms.
Okay. Kate?
One of the opportunities that isn't mentioned, there's a reference to technology in strategy. The use of, we've only got lagging indicators, leading indicators like harsh braking, harsh acceleration, harsh cornering and lane departure, for which there's quite good data available now, can give an indication of behaviour, unsafe behaviours. Operation Snap, where people can upload video footage and send it to the police, people getting enormous penalties just using video footage from the public. It's actually giving information to road safety professionals as well of behaviour that's occurring. There is an experiment which is submitted to a CIHT Road Safety Award of using telemetry on bicycles, where cyclists have to brake hard. That's an indicator that motorists are travelling inappropriately. So they're close passes, pulling in and out of junctions without looking, throwing it so I didn't see you, Smitty type incidents. So telemetry could tell us some of that, and you can get a bigger picture of what's happening on the network. It's that efficiency of those tools. Harsh braking is a good predictor.
Yeah, and telemetry is a really useful point to make, but my particular point is dangerous behaviour as a result of emergency action to avoid a pothole or something like that.
And if we had harsh braking and the officer attending believed it was a factor, they would record it in the contributory factor. Of course, we don't get the contributory factors doing the collision analysis. We wouldn't know even if they did record it.
Yeah, you've made well. Zach?
Yeah, I just one quick point to this is, like, I'm going to go back to my previous career in engineering, and like in engineering you don't, like, there's a lot of risk mitigation that goes on to even prevent a collision happening. I can really clear out a pub speaking about the risk mitigation triangle, and I find it quite ridiculous that when we're considering our roads and road size, that considering elimination of a risk or substitution of a risk is something that we really rarely do. And no wonder that 5 times more people are killed or seriously injured on the journey to work and school than they are at work and school. My actual concise point to this is when I used to work in engineering, we have something called near-miss culture. And I know that there's so many incidents in the road, and what is the Road Safety Investigation Branch going to do? They won't thank me for suggesting that near-miss culture comes in, but like what you're speaking to, Chair, about like swerving to avoid a pothole, like this this is the kind of preventative stuff that could prevent those KSIs. So I'm thinking like a general broad culture of how we mitigate risk within road safety could actually like really help the government try and hit those targets that many people agree are quite ambitious.
Right, okay, thank you, Zach. And the committee are queuing up to go for a drink with you. Right, let's move on to rural road conditions and our particular expert on the topic. Very rural North Norfolk.
Well, expert by virtue of the number of people that I speak to about it and their challenges. I'm interested in your views about what makes rural routes a distinct challenge, bearing in mind that rural roads aren't all the same. And this issue around resource allocation, notwithstanding local government financial constraints, many of my constituents are very frustrated that essentially the answer they get is you can't get a road safety improvement here because not enough people have died yet. Any views on whether that's a particularly stark example of survivorship bias or maybe the opposite? And maybe start with Martin, thank you.
Yeah, it's a common misconception that we won't do anything as a local authority if there hasn't been a fatal collision. We analyse all the collisions across the whole network on a regular basis. We've got different programmes that we run to identify hotspots, particular routes that are causing concern that may have a pattern or collision of these incidents, and we will take the appropriate action when we find these. Again, skid resistance on the routes is an important factor in those investigations across the whole of the network.
And I've tried to do my bit to try and explain this, but I think it's also the case that people feel like perceived safety doesn't factor in those decisions. And that may be causing changes of behaviour if it's not factored into the wider programme.
Yeah.
Perhaps
go ahead, Martin. The perceived risks, we get our emails are filled up with such a question. How do we sort of prioritise those? We have to do that thorough investigation to see whether it is or not a perceived, does it translate into actually people being killed or hurt or injured on our road network? That's the key factors. We had a scheme a few years ago now where we had a very rural crossroads. It was in the middle of sort of a very flat terrain. The visibility was very good, but we had 18 collisions there, 2 of them of which were fatal. We decided, after a number of series of measures like changing give-way signs to stop lines and various other things that we've measured in the past and implemented, we actually realigned one of the junctions so that it was a staggered crossroads, and it's about 4 years worth of after collision, and we've had none at that junction since.
I don't think any of my constituents are complaining about the road safety improvements that do happen. It's the ones that don't. I think, Sarah, if I was to say I accept that if you're looking at one trunk road or one network, but in your view, is that sufficient for rural roads?
Well, I wanted to come back to the point that you made about perceptions of safety, because I think that's one of the biggest barriers to getting more people active in how they travel is fear of road danger. We know from loads of different surveys that that's the big thing, particularly women are concerned about in making the switch to cycling. So we would really have liked to see in the strategy a target around perception of road danger. And that would then also be, if you could have that aggregated to local authority level, that would be a helpful way for local authorities to track and not then just have to be reliant on collision data as you talk about. They would also then be aware of perceptions, which, if what we're trying to achieve here is actually getting more people out of their cars for all of the huge benefits that walking and cycling bring, which we know, and which are absolutely possible to do in rural areas, then we should be looking at how we can mitigate and improve those perceptions. The other thing I would say is that government can do more to help local authorities in rural areas, as I say, by issuing much clearer guidance about appropriate speed limits for different types of roads, and that could happen very quickly.
Just for Martin's reassurance, it's clear that the biggest issue is funding constraint on local authority schemes. What you've done, Sarah, is opened up the discussion about the funding to other objectives within transport, which is extremely welcome. Zach?
Yeah, I'm going to indulge Sarah's tangent because I really wanted to speak to support of KPIs which reference participation, especially with walking, wheeling and cycling. There is within the strategy a KPI for walked or cycle injuries per mile, so that does reference participation. This is good, but I would advocate that this is actually the defining statistic of this strategy. It is all good to reduce killed and seriously injured, but if you do that by decreasing walking, wheeling and cycling, you've just scored a massive own goal. So I've got a colleague that's providing recommendations for the Welsh road safety strategy and provided a few recommendations of how the number of children playing on streets could be used, as well as surveys being used to capture how safe it feels to walk or cycle. I know we're taking a dive away from rural roads, and as a pedestrian advocate, it may feel less relevant here, but actually rural roads are one of the few instances that we see pedestrians actually exercising risk compensation, so they may not make a walked journey because of perceived danger. I just had a very vague question is, do all rural roads have pavements? No. Should all rural roads have pavements? That's a really open question. I don't have the answer to that.
Thank you for bringing us back to the topic of rurality. Kate, does the infrastructure response need to be adjusted for rural road schemes? And do we need to shut some of our rural D roads? Because not everybody needs 4 different routes to their remote property, do they?
So there can be network management changes. As mentioned earlier, the A21, we did an award-winning route scheme on the A21 looking across all of the dimensions. We did a safe system approach. We looked at the speed, we looked at vulnerable road users, we looked at active travel, we looked at school accesses and engaged with the elected members and so on. It was really effective. The rural areas are the challenge because of the unsurvivable speed, as Stan says. It's the physics and biology. Marginal gains are really powerful here because inertia is a function of the square of speed. Relatively small changes in speed will have disproportionate benefits, and they can take not just a fatal to be a serious or serious to be a slight. They can remove a collision completely, just like I described for where speed camera data had done. That marginal gains can be huge, and the disproportionate people who are penalised are older drivers who are fearful of travelling on rural roads. We remove lighting increasingly. At an aggregate level, there's no adverse effect of removing lighting, but some users are disadvantaged more than others. Unfortunately, the things that help some users don't help others. So older drivers like more clarity of markings, markings and studs and so on, and lighting. But younger drivers actually, given those things, will drive faster. So when we removed thousands of streetlights in Buckinghamshire, casualties fell on those roads by more than the roads where we kept the lights on. But older drivers stop going out because they're fearful social isolation kills faster than smoking or obesity. So it's those bigger pictures of benefits. They're really embedded in the rural ones. There's a tool that we used which shows how engagement can be really helpful. When we get new elected members in a council, we would play a game of pin the tail on the donkey. You give them, it used to be paper in the days when it was paper, you give them a map of the county and a sheet of sticky red dots, and you invite them to stick a dot on the highest risk junctions. And they would identify the self-evidently highest risk junctions when nobody crashed. And we need to be attending to data, collisions and telemetry of where the risk is highest in rural areas, not where someone feels to be safer. In our authority area, the entire road safety budget was spent on a roundabout which had very few injuries. On a crossroads it had very few injuries. It's converted to a roundabout, and there were the same number of injuries after than before, and the whole budget being spent on one junction. Because the perception that something has to be done is understandable, but something that was helpful in a way, but not a good spend of the budget was done, and it wasn't helpful.
Politicians queuing up to cut the ribbon, it doesn't help. Can I just check what I understood? You said that adversity is a function of the square root of speed. What is that? Is that adversity or the impact of the crash is a function of the square root of speed?
So the energy of a collision is a function of the square of the speed. So you've got the sort of two-stage process is. Reducing speed reduces the likelihood of a collision because braking distance reduces disproportionately with relatively small speeds. So the chance of avoiding a collision, when there is a collision, the chance of surviving it is better, and the disproportionate benefit to the oldest drivers who, when there is a crash, are the most likely to die.
We've seen improvements in braking distance over the last few years that are about to be eroded away by heavier vehicles. That's a whole other topic area.
It's a moot point because humans haven't evolved.
Yeah.
Vehicles have evolved.
I've noticed that.
And with the cost of living crisis, people are stopping putting new tyres in their car. They're driving without fuel, breaking down. That we haven't talked about motorways. They're breaking down on the motorways.
Really?
Tens of thousands of people a year are running out of fuel on motorways and putting themselves at risk. Tyre blowouts because of bald or incorrectly inflated tyres. And then that creates a risk to the road worker community. We haven't talked about them today. They're, I've been to lots of funerals of colleagues who were killed on the roads as well.
Thank you, Kate. I'm sure we'll pick up on these topics. Can I just come to Dan on this question about, well, let's focus perhaps on the potential gains of looking at severity rather than just frequency. Do we need a different infrastructure approach in rural areas?
So I would say yes, and I think one of the things that the safe system sort of doctrine includes is that actually we move away from being reactive and we move to being more proactive. So when we find the collision circumstances that are likely to lead to severe collisions, then we look to address those systematically. So this is slightly different to what Martin described, and here there's a bit of sort of tyranny, right? Because as a local authority who's only got limited budgets, of course you need to address the places where the crashes have happened because there's an expectation on you doing that. What the safe system basically tells us is we know that where you get, sort of poor road surface, excess speeds, high volumes of traffic, those sorts of collision circumstances, they conflate and they will. In an age of sort of predictive analysis, we can say we're likely to get these levels of fatal and serious crashes occurring in these locations. So the remedy to that is to take more of what we'd refer to as a road assessment approach, something like the International Road Assessment Programme, where we look at the profile of routes, we can identify through things like junction density, traffic flow and speed, asset condition, where we're likely to have problematic areas, and then we can treat them in a more holistic and proactive way. And actually, the government, previous Safer Roads Fund, sought to do that, to identify routes which actually were amenable to that kind of treatment. And I think we'd like to see something more along those lines.
Thank you very much.
Right, okay. Categorising rural roads, Jacob.
Thank you. So the strategy's main commitment is around a new way of categorisation, and I know that, Dan, you've been working on this. So what potential do you think that holds to improve safety on rural roads?
Yeah, so I think in the previous evidence session, one of the questions came around what is a rural road, and Steve Gooding said, well, it's not urban. So what we worked with the RAC Foundation on was trying to establish, is it possible to define from data different sorts of rural road? And indeed we did that. So you look at things like how wiggly the road is, curvature, you look at the road sides, you look at the road carriageway width and some of those sorts of things. And we created some clusters or classifications of road groups from the data. We then tested those with professionals to say, does this cohere as an approach? And I think there's good evidence from that project that yes, not all rural roads are the same. Some of them are highly specified, well designed dual carriageways that are designed to carry high volumes of traffic. They are not to be treated in the same way as low volume hill roads to isolated communities. And I think what having a proper functional classification allows you to do is to use the data to define what those roads are like, and then treatment plans that are appropriate, and not try and fix everything with the same approach.
So how do you go from having a categorisation to then potentially changing speed limits or putting in place other infrastructure changes? How do you think that should happen?
Well, I mean, it goes back to the point that I made earlier about the tooling. You need guidance that supports doing that. I mean, actually, something like the International Road Assessment Programme is great, because what it does is it gives you then star ratings for roads and says, well, if you want to reduce the collision frequency on this stretch of the road broadly by half, i.e. improve it by 1-star rating, here's a package of measures that you could deliver. So we've got quite a lot of tools that would enable us to do that, to move from route identification through to route treatment. But I think it's important that we don't just jump to treating the routes first. We actually use the data to help us triage the network.
Martin, have you got anything from your experience that you think the department should consider to improve rural road safety?
Certainly, probably about 15 years ago now, there was a government directive that all local authorities should review their speed limits on all A and B class roads. They set a threshold for the collision rate per vehicles travelled on those routes, and when we assessed those routes, if they exceeded that, it recommended that we review the speed limit. We subject to sort of other factors taken into account, like mean speeds being inappropriate, the composition of the traffic and things like that would normally go into a speed limit assessment. We had a programme of about 50 speed limit changes as a result of that, and that has been successful in casualty reduction in overall terms. Some of them were different, some actually did increase, most of them decreased, and that could be reflected across other sections of the road network, like C-class roads or U-class roads.
Anybody else? Kate?
Yeah, I mentioned that the route if you're doing the A21, one of the things we found useful on that was using that same kind of approach of categorise different bits of the road, not just a sort of dual and single. And interestingly, the injury rate on the dual carriageway was the same as on the single carriageway, which was quite, in some ways surprising, but not really to us, because people are more confident, travel with more speed, less attention. When something happens, they don't respond. It can be helpful in categorising chunks of road and treat them as chunks, so drivers experience them as chunks. So you then have a consistent approach to vegetation management, to road marking form, to speed limit. And we increased some limits on that route, as well as reducing some limits. We reduced the number over the length. It was quite helpful to draw a bar chart that shows the current speed limit. And we know, drivers really struggle with the 50, 40, 50, 40, 30, both on rural routes and on motorways. If you can smooth the algorithm and find a sweet spot that is something in between, it's more self-explaining to drivers. Then, of course, you can use average speed enforcement very affordably to maintain it at that level, and the incredibly effective return on investment of enforcement on rural roads is very high. And it is popular with the public. There's sort of a fallacy that people don't like enforcement. Average speed is respected by the public. It avoids that, well, if I do a quick overtake to get past this tractor, then I'll get caught in the camera. It feels more respectful to drivers trying to go about their business. And the Which Consumers Association consulted drivers on which behaviours by other road users they most disliked, and speeding was the highest number. Did people want more speed enforcement? Yes, provided it was the right enforcement, evidence-based. So, well communicated, you can find a sweet spot there. Clear, self-explaining roads, consistent routes, drivers can understand them, no nasty surprises, and lowering the speeds and the variance of speeds will give good benefits, relatively low cost.
Thank you.
Okay, right, thank you. First of all, is everybody okay to keep going? Nobody about to keel over the heat? Okay. Right, we'll now move on to IRAP and road assessment tools, which some of you have touched on, so no need to repeat yourselves. Ollie.
Thanks, Chair. I'm not making any promises on the keeling over point, but we'll do our best. Thanks all for coming during the heat wave. We have touched a little bit on IRAP, which the acronym BUSTometer says is the International Road Assessment Programme. It'd be good to perhaps just start with an opening paragraph a short opening paragraph on your overall thoughts of it, and then we can perhaps have a bit of discussion. So how can the department best identify infrastructure risk across the road network before collisions happen, and what role should assessment tools such as IRAP play in that? Perhaps we'll start with you, Martin, given your earlier comments about collisions.
We've used the IRAP through the Safer Roads Fund, as Dan mentioned, for about 4 roads in Hampshire now. We secured roughly about £9 million worth of investment from the DFT to use the IRAP to model the risk. It's been limited to those high-risk routes across the country. We've had good results as a result of that, implementing the measures that were recommended through that computer program modelling, and it's been confined just to those particular reason that investment in that programme. So we haven't had any experience on using it on other sections of Hampshire's road network.
Sarah?
I'd probably defer to other members of the committee, to be honest,
That's
on
fair
this
enough.
one. Yeah.
No, that's all right. None of us know everything. Some of us don't know anything.
Yeah, I will just reiterate a former point that, like, I made about near misses earlier, but my knowledge is not as high on this. So
We see a lot of authorities who recognise the benefit of risk rating, but see it either as unaffordable or disproportionate level of evaluation because they feel they know what the answers are. We feel that if you can bring together the components of the tools, the IRAP risk rating is a forgiving roadside. If somebody had a collision here, what's the likelihood of what kind of injury? Plus telemetry using harsh braking, that's another layer on top of it. Plus the Stats 19, where are people actually crashing? Because you can have two roads that have an identical IRAP score, they're identically theoretically hazardous. On one, no one ever crashes, so it must be self-explaining. And on the other, it has a very high collision rate, so there must be something different about it. And the self-explainingness is quite hard to capture. And one of the things IRAP hasn't done well and is trying to change is route consistency. We know that route consistency is a good predictor of good outcomes, but because IRAP is done on chunks, this 100 metres, that 100 metres, in theory, if you had 100 metres of dual 3, dual 6-lane road, and then 100 metres of single narrow cart track, and then 100 metres of dual 4, it would take each of those in isolation. Obviously, the driver experience on that would be dreadful. So we need to make sure the route consistency bit of it gets picked up, and it struggles with things like coding accesses versus minor side roads, industrial premises in rural areas, farm accesses. When you get down in the detail of the unclassified and the sort of B, C and unclassified roads, it struggles a bit more.
Thank you.
I've already addressed the fact that I think it's part of the toolbox, and I think there's a number of things that are in the pipeline that start to address some of those concerns. So the cost of data collection and coding has been raised by authorities. As we move into an increasingly sort of digitised age, there are ways of using remote sense data to be able to improve data access. Actually, the International Road Assessment Programme team are developing a network-wide assessment tool that allows you to effectively kind of cluster attributes and build out a sense of what the overall network performance is likely to be on the basis of your design specification and that sort of thing. So I think there are some things that are definitely helping to improve that. I think to kind of go back to the point I've made on a couple of occasions, I think data facilitates us being able to do an awful lot more sitting here in 2026 of triaging networks, understanding which bits of it we then need to use a full road assessment programme to explore, and then what are the interventions that need to be delivered there. And I think in a world where now we have connected vehicle data which tells us about vehicle speeds, tells us about the amount of slippage from tyres, whether people's windscreen wipers were in use. There's so much data that is now available that allows us to describe networks and the performance of vehicles and drivers on them, that actually I think we get to a point quite quickly where we start to use tools like IRAP in a very focused and very productive way.
Thank you. Right, Road Safety Investigation Branch, Alex.
Thank you, Chair. The strategy will introduce a Road Safety Investigation Branch. If I could start with you, please, Dan. In your written evidence, you said that existing coalition data is useful, but actually we want this to be a Road Safety Investigation Branch rather than Analysis Branch. What powers do you think that the body would need to be effective?
Yeah, so at the moment, what is imagined doesn't have the ability to compel witnesses and collate evidence. So, we have, in some cases, some very good police collision investigation teams, and they produce thorough reports, but they are generally focused on trying to identify whether there is fault in the crash, and therefore whether somebody needs to be arrested and criminal proceedings. There's an awful lot below that actually we can learn from in the circumstances of a crash. And actually there was a study in Cambridgeshire that said probably only 40% of the factors that you would identify at that sort of sharp end, and 60% of the stuff that we could learn from the crash would come from a more detailed investigation. So I think there's a lot more that we can learn. There's definitely more that we can get out of the investigations that we've got and feeding through into things like prevention of future death reports from coroners and child death overview panels, etc. But I think if we genuinely want to understand some of what Kate just described, it's like we could have two bits of road where they have different outcomes despite the fact that to all intents and purposes we think they should be performing the same. That requires a level of insight that is only likely to be delivered if we can have the quality of investigation and parity of investigation that we apply to rail, marine and aviation. And I think, just given the numbers that we've already talked about, 1,600, 1,700 people a year dying on our roads, I think we owe it to them to learn from the crashes that happen in a consistent way with other modes.
Okay. Sarah. Yeah. Oh, sorry. Go on.
Yes. Just on the road safety investigation branch, I just wanted to make the point that we're really keen that we welcome it, we called for it. We think it's really important that it's able to look thematically at crashes, so rather than just sort of focusing on spectacular, large crashes that happen on motorways involving heavy freight or that sort of thing, that it actually is able to look thematically. So looking, for example, at crashes that involve pedestrians and cyclists, and you could look at similar crashes and try and draw conclusions from those in a thematic way. And the other point I wanted to make is just to echo the comments that it's important that it's transparent and that its recommendations are available to the public, and that there is then it's then an expectation that those measures and actions will be taken in response to the recommendations of the branch.
And Martin, also answer what we were just asking, but how should the department ensure that the recommendations are practical for local highways authorities to implement?
I think we already operate a casualty reduction partnership, which we investigate all fatal and potentially fatal collisions that happen on our road network. We work in partnership with the police. We will go and look at the site within 30 days of an incident occurring. We will look at the existing history of the collisions at that location. We're taking into account the circumstances of the actual collision, and we're also taking into account sort of public comments. And the aim is to prevent another incident occurring again at that location. It's been very successful. Probably before the casualty reduction partnership was formalised, probably in the early 2000s, we had about 70 fatal collisions occurring on the network, and we're down to around sort of average around the low 30s each year now. So I think the investigation branch could build on what local authorities already do, and then have another layer on top of that to oversee and learn from all of our experiences collectively.
In which case, should we just not move all of your officers into a national scheme so that all this best practice could be shared, but you're kind of on the ground?
Could well be. That's one good reason.
Quite like that. Good. All right.
Okay. You done?
Yeah.
Yep. Lovely. Scott, speed limits.
The government's going to issue guidance for local authorities on speed limits. Do you think, is guidance, I don't want to preempt your answer, is guidance enough? So I think that's what's lacking. Go for it, Kate.
So we talked earlier around one of the difficulties around, authorities have their own political pressures, their own context. They know their networks really well, which is helpful. But local flexibility creates national inconsistency, and so drivers then experience that when they go across boundaries between authorities, for example. It's not quite clear what the guidance will cover. We've had guidance in the past. Some of the tools that were supposed to come with it, the speed limit assessment tool, never really existed. It was an Excel spreadsheet that sort of never really operated well. It needs to be effective and easy to use, but you need the leadership and the direction that says, this is what good looks like, and we expect you to do it. Whereas if you just say, well, here's something you might like to use, you might like, enforcement's very effective, but if you don't give any direction, then somebody who, an authority where that's not aligned with the political priorities, they won't do the changes or the enforcement. So there's got to be some sort of lead between it, that the limits are reviewed. They are reviewed in a context of, in the urban areas we had sort of place and movement matrix of the relative function of the road. The speed limits need to be assessed on that basis, but you need that push down to actually make it happen.
So I think last week when we spoke to the Secretary of State about this, she said that, well, if local authorities don't support, making streets safer, the electorate can always change them in the next election. Do you think she should be more involved in trying to direct those authorities to make the right decision, but you know what I mean?
I think we do need a direction, but we also need to communicate the scale of the benefits that we see. We've talked in 20s about, it's the prize actually isn't road safety, the prize is public health.
Yeah.
In air quality, in people who are physically active, the mortality, morbidity benefits of active travel they dwarf the road safety impact. So that's the prize. The prize is getting re-elected because you make the change, not getting re-elected because you didn't make the change. Yeah. And there are some fallacies around what people want. We need to hear more from the voices of the people who've had the change and like it. People tend to be vocal if they oppose something. If they like it, they're not. Some big political examples we can remember. That we need to recognise what people value and their everyday experience. People kind of take safety for granted. So it is an electoral issue, but the public need to understand the benefits, and the authorities need to understand that it's a vote winner to do the right thing and communicate it well.
Yeah, that's the key point, because it's not just up to the public to understand the benefits. I think people who are elected and experts like yourself also have a duty to kind of explain and promote those benefits. So in terms of the guidance, just going back to where you started, so the guidance is not just about where we put the sign and how big it should be and what the repeater frequency is. It should also be about the actual design of the road when it comes to upgrading. I'm putting words into your mouth, of course.
It's the operating speed, and in a design context, you've got three metrics. You've got the speed limit, you've got the design speed, which makes an allowance for some people travelling above the limit, and then you've got the actual profile as for speed or proposed road. Obviously you don't have that third component yet, and it's a really complex matrix, and hard-pressed designers trying to set those things sometimes will think a higher speed limit is necessary. There was a coroner observation of a collision the National Highways and Local Authority Network joined, and the view was that the speed limit past this slip road from the motorway had an excessively high speed limit. The road had an excessively high speed limit, that any error by a driver at that point would almost inevitably lead in an incredibly high severity incident. National Highways' perception was they can't reduce the speed limit because it impacts journey time, but it doesn't impact journey time. It improves journey time reliability with almost no effect and often no effect on journey time. But there's a perception that lowering the limit reduces journeys. We've seen it on the motorway, variable speed limit. Travelling at a lower speed, you get there faster. It's counterintuitive, but people do experience it. They realise it's a less stressful journey if you have clarity of what the speed limit is, and fewer changes is helpful. But you do need that direction to understand lower limits are just an imperative where these unsurvivable collisions occur.
Okay, Sarah, you're sitting at the edge of your seat. So before you say what you're going to say, I mean, earlier on you were speaking quite excitedly about how CWIS comes with ring-fence money for walking and cycling. Do you think we need ring-fence money to encourage local authorities to reduce speed limits?
Yes.
That's an easy one. Onto your point. No,
I mean, I think that it's very hard to see how the targets in this strategy are delivered without some quite big intervention on speed across the country. It's really hard to see how that could happen. So,
intervention by whom, though? Do you think it should be left to local authorities through guidance or direction from the Secretary of State?
I think political leadership is needed, and I think at Cycling UK, we absolutely, local authorities are best placed to make those final decisions, but the culture and the selling the vision and the public messaging around why lower speed limits are so important and so beneficial, there is definitely a role for national government in that. So in setting the expectations, setting the guidance, because what's happening at the moment is that it's being done piecemeal at a local level, and in lots of cases there isn't the political leadership at that local level to sell why we're doing this. So we're now seeing situations where even though a majority of people might support an intervention, whether that's speeding, whether that's school streets, and we've done polling on this at Cycling UK, there's this thing called pluralistic ignorance which is occurring, where it's all the rage in active travel and folk like me thinking about this. So basically this is a phenomenon whereby people are in the majority in what they feel, but they perceive themselves to be in the minority, and they're therefore less likely to speak out. So school streets is a classic example of this. They're very popular. If you ask people if they would support a school street where they live, 70-something% support. Okay, if you ask them, do you think your neighbours would support this? That's something like 20% lower support. So it's having this chilling effect because people are seeing the loud voices, the loud small, voices that are in the minority of opposition. They're then less likely to speak out because they think they're in the minority, and that then has the impact on the local councillors thinking maybe the majority don't support this. So you need political leadership at every layer of government, but there's definitely a role for national government to say, we think 20 miles an hour in urban areas is absolutely the right approach for these reasons. We think, 40 miles an hour on this type of road is the right for these reasons.
Should they set that nationally then and just get local authorities to opt out of that if they think that's the right thing to do? Like I think is happening in Wales. Do you think?
Yeah, the Wales example has showed huge benefits in a number of lives lost on the roads. I think,
But the public perception, people in the street walking past outside this building probably think that, it's been really unpopular in Wales, it didn't work. But in fact, it is working, isn't it?
The evidence is that it absolutely did work, yes. It's been a huge success. And so, I think we see the role for government as setting what the expectations are, and then local authorities can decide which type of road is right for them. They know their roads better, but what type of road should have what speed limit is, a role that national government should play.
Just picking up, I guess, on what Scott said with regards to people walking across this building, but actually I'm going to bring this around to political leadership. Obviously, within these circles of transport, I think we generally have a consensus that 20 mile an hour limits save lives. And I was showing the benefits of Living Streets' Walk to School outreach programme to the member for Doncaster North a couple of months ago. And this was one of the things that has transcended transport circles. And all I needed to say to him is, do you know in the first 12 months of Wales implementing this, it's estimated to have saved 100 lives. And on a constituency level, if you say that to a constituency MP, a lot of the things that they will hear about and a lot of things that ward councillors will hear about is speeding traffic. So I completely really following what Sarah said to do with plurality. As soon as you speak to people on your community, what this means for the people it kind of reframes the issue. And I think I'd encourage you committee, as what I hope would say as advocates for this, would to speak to your peers and fellow members on this issue, because no one in their constituency wants more people killed on their roads. So lead with that and be impassioned and unwavering.
Okay. On differing speed limits potentially in different areas, is at the moment we have a default 30 in urban areas with streetlights, and we're all supposed to know that and remember that from highway code, etc. Is there a risk that where you have different authorities having different rules on default, that there will be a plethora of additional signage, or a risk that drivers will get away with saying, I didn't know because I didn't know I was in a different authority? Is there a quick answer to that, Kate?
I think that there is a risk. Wales shows that there is a clarity and an efficiency and an unambiguity about consistency of approach, and with hundreds of highway authorities each doing their own thing, you will end up with inconsistency. I think the law in England will be the same if it's, it's street lighting, it's the same. So that would be the same between authorities unless we had a national change. But it absolutely has to be that. And one of the other points about what the public like, it's cheaper to get your car insured if you live in Wales. Yeah. That's quite persuasive. If it didn't have a benefit, insurers are only based on an algorithm model of risk.
Martin, have you got a thought on that?
Yes, obviously the current default, like you said, this 30 mile an hour speed limit. Many of our newer residential roads are designed with a 20 limit in mind, but they're not actually. Needs a TT traffic regulation order to actually put a 20 limit in. Setting aside the funding limitations that we have, residential roads, yes, if there was a wash of money, we would, 20 limits would be encouraged in those residential areas across our network.
Okay, thank you. Right, Jacob, speed and the design of roads.
Yeah, so we've touched on this in some of the evidence that you've given, just about how streets and roads can be designed to reduce speed, and I wondered what are the kind of best physical features that can be put in place in order to reduce speed. Which do you think are the most effective? Zach, do you want to start?
Yeah, it's like from hearing Kate's excellent evidence that she's given, I think she will be able to go really deeply into this. But a 20 mile an hour limit on a wide straight road with long sight lines often experiences lower compliance than a 20 mile an hour limit on a street designed for lower speeds. And generally, speed limits establish the legal and social expectation of appropriate behaviour. I feel we've had a consensus on this panel of speed limits should be like self-implied, self-enforcing, and generally, and I'm not going to speak much more, compliance is poorer when road design suggests a higher speed is acceptable. And I'm going to go into a different point, a practical example. I used to live in Sheffield, and I think this kind of leads into a general contradiction in how we design our streets, where we have places for people intertwined with places to move vehicular traffic. So you could probably imagine this as a particular street, Edgware Road maybe, Campsall Road in Sheffield. And what you'll see is you'll bring lots of people into this environment to enjoy nightlife, shopping, but then you'll also use it as a main arterial road, usually for moving traffic. So like at the moment, the Campsall Road in Sheffield is going through a speed reduction scheme, but fundamentally, I would say an issue here is purpose. And then that's reflected in KSIs, because if you're mixing vehicular traffic and people and saying it's a space for both, then it's just a contradiction. So I might have widened it out, but I'm really interested to hear more technical stuff from Kate. And
yeah, we've got loads of evidence about what reduces speed. Absolutely, the self-explained road is the key. We've tended to have excessively wide roads, excessively linear roads. We can re-engineer to reduce those characteristics, and we know it's very effective, but it's incredibly expensive. So while engineering absolutely works, the deliverability of it, even if you had an unlimited budget, an unlimited number of people, the actual logistics of how much of the network you could change is quite small. It's 192,000 miles of roads. That's nearly all of it. And the irony is, if the new roads don't look like the existing roads, you've actually made it more inconsistent and more confusing. So we know things like Manual Streets guidance works really well. We get naturally low design speeds, naturally high compliance. And you don't need 100% compliance with a 20 limit to get safety. Yeah. The 90% of the benefit comes from the few miles at the top, just like 90% of the health benefit comes from the first few hundred steps that you walk. Sometimes the great's the enemy of the good. People think we must make it gold-plated. Gold-plated's great, especially if someone else is paying for it. But public budgets, actually, it's about what can you do most effectively. What's the return on investment? And the speed limit changes are the biggest return on investment. With enforcement, perception of enforcement is what drives compliance, not the penalty. Penalties do matter, but if you don't think you'll get caught, it doesn't matter what the penalty is.
Yeah. Martin.
Yeah, there's probably no one solution to cover all options. Many sort of traffic calming measures, traffic management measures have some pros and cons for each. of the scenarios, like in residential areas, traffic road humps are very effective at reducing speeds, but then have an impact perhaps on drainage, parking, chicanes and build-outs, traffic islands. So there's a series of factors that really do have to be taken into account to support low speed limits. Village gateway signs to enhance the start of the speed limits are very effective as well.
And in terms of what Zach was saying, where you've got spaces that traffic and pedestrians come in close contact, I think particularly about schools, I have a lot of contact with them, and I know in London there's school zones where there's obviously limits on where people can drive. What do you think would be most effective in those kind of contexts so that pedestrians and those in active travel can actually use the road safely?
Changes in sort of the materials used on the carriageway surface can sort of create a different type of zone and give priority to pedestrians over vehicles. Restrictions actually placed on the road to actually prevent vehicles going into that in the first instance, or limited to a certain, keep the residents able to gain access at school times. There's a variety of different options that could be considered.
Sarah?
Just quickly, and then I'll come to Zach, because I'm sure he'll have lots to say on this. Just in terms of thinking about the school, obviously there are loads of benefits of getting children to walk or cycle to school, and that's why there's such an ambitious target in the cycling and walking investment strategy. And so when thinking about the environment immediately around the school, everything that can be done to disencourage people from driving their children to school. So school streets, creating restrictions on motor traffic going near to schools, all of those things I think are really important to send that really clear signal and make the easiest choice walking or cycling.
And then I'll come to Dan.
Yeah, just a quick point, I guess, in terms of funding. One of the things Living Streets called for in the evidence we submitted in our Safer Streets for All report was a dedicated Routes to School Fund and School Streets Fund. Obviously, CWIS Free over the next 5 years is taking a huge focus on walk to wheel and cycle journeys to school, which we really, really welcome. One of the things we deliver, as I mentioned earlier, a walk to school programme on behalf of the UK government, but one amazing tool that we've been using is school route audits. We're doing things on behalf of children, but actually if you put the microphone on the voices of the children and tell them what do they want in their school environment, this is a really important thing, which I find is a very powerful thing to bring local authorities along. Everyone, I think, and children have a right, in my opinion, to walk wheel to school if they choose, and to also play on streets as well, really. And I think again, what we're going back to what we were speaking about earlier to do with culture, it's a win-win, and it's something where we can really embed healthy habits for life, and we'll see the various benefits as we go through over decades with that.
Yeah, so I think, as we said in our written evidence, and I think I've echoed here, we need to start with function. And I think school streets or low traffic neighbourhoods are a great example of that. The London low traffic neighbourhoods that they implemented reduced care size by 37%. So there's evidence that they work from a safety benefit. But if we just take these kind of smaller localised geographic areas, we fail to achieve the benefits that are available across the entire network. And I think the first time I found in documents from DFT that we discussed a national functional road hierarchy where we basically thrash out what we expect these roads to do, how we expect them to perform, what kinds of activity we want to go on them, and therefore what kinds of speeds and infrastructure should we have in place, was 1998. We've been talking about it for 30 years, and actually it's the heart of delivering a safe system. So I think, yes, let's look at school streets, but my kids cycle to school 4 miles. So localising the infrastructure around their school is great, but they're off it in 30 seconds. They've still got 3.5 miles of journey to make.
Okay, right. I'll wait for 13 to when Sarah comes back. So, Daniel, 17. Oh, 16. That's also a Sarah question. Yeah.
I'll go to 16.
Go to 16. Okay, yeah.
Or my iPad says at the moment there. Bear with me, sorry. So does the strategy go do enough rather to recognise the link between accessibility and road safety, and particularly in terms of how disabled people experience and navigate the road experience?
We, CIHT, have done a lot of both guidance and training for the community around accessibility. Things like mobility impairment and visual impairment are reasonably well understood, albeit there's still poor compliance with the design guidance, so that's not good enough. Neurological impairment is an increasing issue from a transport point of view. Dementia and autism, for example, change how people perceive the highways. We know that people who are fearful or uncertain about their journey, about the place, so public realm, we saw shared streets, shared space in streets in urban areas. Even if they are safer in those places, if they don't feel safe, they don't go there. And social isolation then is the threat. So there is a road safety issue. There's an accessibility issue of having access to transport in urban and rural areas. But it comes back to that prize is the public health one, social engagement, and also access to goods and services. You know, people are disproportionately unable to get to education, to get to employment, to get to shops, to get to medical facilities, if the routes don't meet their needs, or they feel they don't meet their needs. Perception is everything. When you leave your front door, you're not sure whether you'll get there. It only takes one drop curb to make one lack of dropped curb to make a whole route be inaccessible. The bus stop might be accessible, the bus might be accessible. If you can't get to the bus stop, it's academic.
Zach?
Yeah, I was really happy to see this question on the billing. Road safety is not only just disproportionately affects those with accessibility issues, it's also a racialised issue, and I'm really glad that the government reflects this within the strategy, that people from an ethnic minority and deprived area are 3 times more likely to be killed or seriously injured walking on Britain's roads than a white person from a non-deprived area. Moving this to disabled people, they are 5 times more likely to be injured than non-disabled people, which is quite startling statistics. I guess one of the things within roads, I mentioned this earlier, it doesn't feel like it speaks about road sides, and in enabling the things that Kate so articulately mentioned, the thing that at Living Streets we would advocate for is clear pavements. We might move on to this when speaking to the manual for streets, but I'll give us a starter for 10 anyway. One thing that I wouldn't want to conflate the manual for streets with is actually the requirement for appropriate pedestrian design guidance. Cycling has LTM 120, which has been doing some really good things, but we always think that the "and walking" is in very small text, and a lot of the time when you're speaking about the public realm, I think a lot of people struggle to kind of articulate what that means for walking. The Manual for Streets also considers all these factors that you mentioned, and undercuts things such as micromobility storage, accessibility. We're facing very much with new technologies in 2026 a real competition for curbside space, and you expect me in this moment to go back to pavement parking, but indulge me, I'll give you a different issue. We've been seeing private organisations operating delivery robots in various areas of the UK. Now these are a huge obstruction to wheelchair users, visually impaired people, and at the moment they're operating in these areas with no national regulatory framework. There's a culture here that's going on, I guess, driven by private interests in trial first without consultation, and these delivery robots, surely they should not come at the convenience of pedestrians. And I'll close really my bit on robots by saying that they're already being banned in North American cities like Toronto and parts of Pittsburgh and Chicago, but that's not everywhere. I read yesterday that Pennsylvania have changed highway regulations to give delivery robots the same status as pedestrians. So what is that saying about accessibility? So we need the legal status of delivery robots, also known as PDDs, clarifying, and we'd advocate them to be excluded from upcoming micromobility regulation. The point of this is are we making our pedestrians more, like our footways more accessible? No, the sales are taking us the other way.
Can I just? I'm the parent of a wheelchair user with a severe sight impairment, so I live and breathe these issues. But do you think? I hear what you said about neurological conditions, but do you think there is still the need for that stronger guidance? Therefore, we'll see more guidance hopefully on mobility coming forward, but absolutely. For blind, visually impaired, and for wheelchair users.
Yes, absolutely, and going back to stuff like pavement parking, of which is a particular issue and forces those those with accessibility requirements, who are visually impaired, who use wheelchairs out into the road. We are working closely with the national government to produce this robust guidance. Ultimately, and coming back to a general theme today, it would be great if the national government had strong advocacy and strong accountability to local authorities on these issues. And I don't think I've got any more detail to go into on that, but maybe other people might be able to.
Just one point. When we talk about the safe system, there are two aspects of it which often are not included. One is crime and fear of crime, and design of areas that are inherently feeling safe. Some of it's about lighting, it's about locations and types of planters, it's about sight lines and those sorts of things. It has a big impact. And the other part is suicide, which might seem to be an outlier. 1 in 5 deaths on the strategic road network is suicide. So it's a huge issue, and it then impacts public realm because, for example, if you have a high bridge where there might be a suicide risk, if you put a very high parapet on to reduce the suicide risk, you can create a character that makes people fearful and then reduces active travel. So the interaction of people's experience as pedestrians, as cyclists going about normal travel behaviour, persons at risk from a mental health perspective, and workers who get tied up in both of those, it's really important that they get picked up, and the micromobility links to crime, because a lot of crime is on illegal e-scooters and illegal electrical motorbikes, not just
Right, I am going to press on because it'd be really good if we could get out of this heat in 10 minutes. Ollie, just a quick question on manual for streets. Zach's not allowed to answer it.
Yeah, quick fire.
You've already in the fence answered it.
Yeah, so. Quick fire round here. So if you had one suggestion for what the department should include in the updated manual for streets that would improve road safety, what would that be? I think you've already given one, as the chair says.
Yeah, that's good. Well, I might offer it anyway, which I would advocate that the hierarchy of road users, as introduced in the January 2022 Highway Code changes, is prevalent throughout. And then an accountability mechanism. What use is a strategy document or a manual if there's no incentivisation to use it?
Thank you. Who else would like to offer a quick suggestion? Yeah.
I think the update should include clarity over and strengthen clarity over vulnerable road users.
Yeah.
I think that the vision-led approach is just the important thing, to be really clear, what are we trying to encourage? What behaviour are we trying to encourage when we design these streets? So make the space for the types of transport that we're trying to encourage. So walking, cycling, more space, more separated space, and that will then also have knock-on effects and improvements for road safety.
It absolutely needs to be system-based, but it also needs to have enough clarity of its status, because at the moment a lot of local highway authorities are requiring design manual for roads and bridges to be used as the design input for even 20, 30, 40 mile an hour schemes, because they feel it has status, it has certainty, it has standards written in a way that are clear and unambiguous, and they like that. A departure from standard is very clear. So
manual for streets doesn't have the equivalent status.
No.
Thank you. Dan?
So I think I would circle back to this point about clarity of function, having a clear functional hierarchy, well described what we think roads should be doing and therefore how they should perform.
Right, we've got some commonality there, which is very helpful. Right, okay, now we go to, I think I've got this right, 17.
So given the evidence about the disproportionate risks cyclists face on roads, do you think the strategy does enough to turn that evidence into practical measures to improve road safety?
Yeah, I think I'd go back to what I said at the start, that the strategy is a broad strategy that then relies on lots of different parts of society to implement the strategy. So for us, the critical thing is about infrastructure. So that's going to be about the delivery of the cycling walking investment strategy over the next period. How much investment goes into creating those safe, segregated cycle lanes to encourage more people to feel safe getting out on their bikes. It's then going to be about speed, how quickly the government moves on things like rural speed limits will have a really big impact on whether enough is done for cycling. And then it's the stuff on awareness around the highway code that we think is really, really important as well. So they'd be the critical things for us. But we do, just to quickly go back to investment, we're really keen, and we've done research with IPPR looking at this, looking at the amount of investment that you need to create a really safe, high-quality cycle network across the country. And that comes out at around 10% of the transport budget every year, so around £50 per head. And at the moment, if you look at the 4.5 billion allocated in CWIS 3, that comes out at around 3%. It kind of depends whether you include HS2 and some other bits. But essentially, we're looking for a magnitude of investment significantly more than is currently in the ambition of the government on this.
Okay, thank you. And Steph, a yes or no question?
A yes or no question? Which?
Hang on, it's supplementary on 18.
Oh, yes. Forgive me, my laptop has just.
Okay, I'll do it.
So, you can do it.
Do you think the road safety measures set out in the third cycling and walking investment strategy are sufficiently ambitious?
Yes, because it includes a KPI to do with perception of safety. Why is that not in the road safety strategy as well?
Interesting. Good. Anyone else? No, Sarah?
I think the ambition is there, but it's delivering.
Lovely. Okay, thank you. And last but not least, Alex.
Motorcyclists make up 1% of traffic, but about 1 in 5 road deaths. Do you think that the strategy adequately addresses the infrastructure risks that they face? And can Project PRIME, another good acronym, perceptual rider information for maximising expertise and enjoyment, what can that realistically achieve?
I think the Prime project is fantastic, and I think at this point it'd be worth just acknowledging Alex Steadman, who led that work, who sadly passed away quite recently. But it works in specific circumstances. It helps riders to find their way around curves on rural roads. It therefore does reduce some of the conflicts, but I think the exposure of motorcyclists, particularly at higher speeds, is still a persistent problem and quite difficult to reconcile within the boundary of the safe system, because they are ostensibly vulnerable and moving at high speed. And I think we actually arguably do need to look at not just the sort of the power two-wheeler piece in its fullest sense, because we've touched on powerful electrically power-assisted cycles that are now being used extensively in urban areas for food delivery and some of those sorts of things. I think again we need a more systemic look at protecting those on powered two-wheelers.
Anyone else, Martin?
Education, training and publicity play an important part, along with enforcement from the police.
We the Society of Road Safety Auditors Conference, the CHT holds every year, heard in detail about both the Prime initiative and how it worked. They did 22 sites. They got a reduction in speed at those sites, and it got an improvement in lane positioning at those sites. What's helpful is there aren't many measures that work in places where you didn't do them, because the riders who learn at those locations where to position on a rural bend then can use that skill in places where the markings aren't present. So it's quite an unusual one, where essentially it's a conditioning tool. It helps you to learn how to position.
Do we need more pilots, or should we just get on and do it everywhere? Do we need more pilots, or should we just get on with it and roll it out?
So for Prime specifically, it only tackles the single vehicle loss of control collisions primarily, or losing control and going under somebody else. So the motorcycle error positioning on bends, it is a brilliant tool, and it helps in other places. But many of the other collision types involving motorcyclists, disproportionately turning collisions. Motorcycle Law Scotland did a fantastic event at the session at the auditors event, looking at large numbers of motorcycle collisions, showing videos of the collisions, and explaining in each case the legal action on which road users was taken, and motorcyclists, where they were found to be partly responsible for the outcome, either the causation of the collision or the severity of injury because of their speed, their positioning, had they been attending to other users. It struck me of how little we actually know about some of the rider understanding and behaviour. Education is tricky. If it were easy, we'd have been doing it years ago. Actually, you often tend to educate the people who want to know, and often the people who most need the knowledge may not come forward and take part. So again, messaging is critical for the motorcycling community. Positioning it where it's helpful and useful, not nanny state nagging and deterring enjoyment.
Thank you.
Right, okay, thank you ever so much, everybody. That concludes today's session, and thank you for your time. We did zip through a couple of questions you might have prepped for, and therefore, and anyway, do write to us if there's anything you feel you haven't been able to cover in your answers this morning. We'll be continuing this inquiry in a few weeks' time. That concludes today's meeting. Order.